Hi, this is Prem from Tribe, and I am going to be talking about boundaries in this video because I think it's a really important topic, and I think that it's a topic that doesn't really get talked about enough, actually. And I think, you know, what I make up about that is because it's not sexy and it sounds a bit dry, and I think there's quite a bit of ambiguity around boundaries and what they actually mean. And at Tribe, we actually see that understanding the nature of boundaries, different types of boundaries, internal and external boundaries, and boundaries for our different bodies, our thinking, feeling, physical, behavioral sort of bodies, all have different boundary systems. And we see the understanding of this and the practice of this actually as a foundation for a healthy relationship with myself and healthy relationship with the world around me. So some of how I'm going to be talking about this is theoretically, but then I'm also going to be giving examples relationally. First, I want to start with a question that was asked on another Facebook Live in the comments section when I was talking about the 5-step boundary process of Vicky Tidwell Palmer's, which I think is fantastic, by the way, and I highly recommend checking out her website. She really is a big kind of leading thinker on the topic of boundaries, as is Pia Melody. And one of the Facebook Lives, I was talking about that 5-step boundary process, and I was talking about the third step of setting a boundary. And the third step is identifying what my power center is. So the action, is it an action that I have the power, the outcome, is it something that I have the power to create, or is it something that I need to reach out for the support of somebody else to create that outcome? Or do I need to deal directly with the person whom I am in some kind of process around? Or am I actually powerless? And so I want to just address that question and then move on with talking about how to effectively make requests. And I like to interchange the words boundary with request. So I'm going to talk about how to effectively do that and give some examples of that, of how to not effectively do that and how to effectively do that. I'm going to talk in that about the difference between demands, ultimatums, and requests, and how to most effectively present a request or boundary. So the do's and don'ts. So first, let me start with the power center question, which was basically a woman was wanting to know, how would I know, what's an example of when I can actually resolve, or what's an example where I have the power to create the outcome that I want? So I thought best way to explain this is to really talk about some examples, personal examples, and then I have one or two personal examples in there, and then another example that other people may relate to. So the first example that I have is my partner has children, and they're young children, and they're full of life and full of questions, and I don't have children. I haven't been a mum officially, and so I'm learning about how to be around young people in my home and in their home, and how to kind of navigate that. And so one of the things that I was having feelings about was feelings of feeling overwhelmed at times. And it would often happen for me when it was nighttime and we'd kind of had the afternoon together after school, and then it was dinner time, and it was like dinner, clean up, sort of like cooking dinner, clean up, bath time, bed. And I would notice that somewhere in that trajectory of activities, I would start to feel overwhelmed. And that would arise in my body as like my heart would be beating faster, and I'd notice my breath was a bit shorter than usual. And I noticed then that I would just start to feel a little bit tight and feel somewhat withdrawn, and then had to really catch myself, because at times I'd feel like I would want to be snappy and short, and I didn't want to be that way. And it felt like, at the time, it felt like, I don't really have a choice. I don't know what to do. So I did some writing about it and kind of processed. I shared in another Facebook Live that I actually have in my phone and notes, in my notes section, the 5-step boundary process, just the steps with nothing underneath, and I have it repeated several times, like lots of times, so that I can just quickly jot down what's happening. If you want to know about the 5-step boundary process, have a look in the Facebook Live from day 46. Carly and I are talking about that. And so I took some time to work out what was happening for me and where my center of power was. And so firstly, what I identified, so in step 2, I identified what my need was, and my need was for harmony and peacefulness. And then when I looked at, well, where is my center of power? What do I have the power to create that? Well, I did, and I do have the power to create that. And so I'm talking about a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they're definitely in a part of their lives where they're really interested in asking questions and exploring things and dancing and putting music on, and this is really healthy, and I want to encourage that, and I don't want to control that. So actually, I do have the power to create peacefulness and harmony, and what that looks like for me is taking some time to just step out and go and do something that has me feel peace and harmony. So, I'm lucky I'm in a situation where my partner can be with them and I can go and do that. So for me now, what I do is I've let him know that, and I just say, hey, I'm going to go for a quick walk, or I'm going to go and sit and have a meditate in the bedroom for 15 minutes, or I'm going to pop and have a bath now. So this is where the power center is actually, there's an internal locus of control here. I actually can create the outcome that I need. So another example which I wanted to offer to you is if a partner, for example, or someone I live with is in a lot of emotional stress, or they're exhibiting behavior that feels chaotic in some way to me, and I'm noticing that I'm being impacted by that such that I feel stress, then, or for example, if I live in a share house situation where there's a lot of noise and I'm feeling some frustration about that, so check in, like, what is my need here? And so my need might be for, in the noisy example, it would be a similar outcome to the previous example. But for example, let's say, back to, say, a partner who's going through a lot of emotional processing, or someone that I live with, then I check out, well, what do I actually need here? I actually need to feel some stability. That's why I'm having these feelings, is because I'm actually feeling unstable, and I need to find my center again. So that's the need. That's step 2. And then step 3 is identifying my power center. So again, this example is one that I actually can create that outcome for myself. So if, for example, it was with a partner, what I might do is that I might say, I'm going to have a couple of days on my own, and I'm just noticing I'm not really that well resourced at the moment, so I'm going to spend the next 2 days just doing that and self-caring and finding my sense of center. How is that for you to hear? Is there anything that you need? So this is where it's a negotiation. Like if I'm in a partnership, I want to make sure that I'm staying open to hearing my impact in making that statement. And maybe I've said, that I was going to help them with something over the next 2 days. So then I might say, and I'm present to the fact that I said I would help you put together that email. I'm wondering if we can do that separately, and you could email it to me and I can check through it. Is that something that you'd be willing to do? How does that feel for you? So this is where I'm actually recognizing that I've made some kind of an agreement with them. There's a contract there, and I don't want to violate an agreement that I've made with them. And I'm also naming that I need to adjust that agreement and checking for impact and staying open to some kind of negotiation there. So again, that was an example where my power center is here with me, and if there's an existing contract of some kind, then I do need to reach out to that person and I can stay in some kind of a negotiation. One last example that I could give, this is not a personal example, but another one which I think is useful and I've heard people share about before, is when they have, say, a shared bank account with a partner and they feel a sense of feeling out of control or concern about the way that their partner is using the money. So a way that I may identify what the need that I have is safety or security of my belongings. So the power center in that example, do I have the power to create that outcome? Yes, I do. So I could set up my own bank account because I have a right to protect my belongings and what's rightfully mine. Yeah. So these are examples of where the power center lies with me and I actually can get the outcome that I'm wanting. Okay, so now I want to move along and talk about what is the difference between a demand, an ultimatum, or a request. And request and boundary I'm using interchangeably here. So when someone is scared or feels fear or anger, they could have a tendency to make a demand or even an ultimatum. And as I'm going to talk about later, this is not an effective way of making a request. It's not a request. And it actually, the point actually that I see of making a request or sharing a boundary or making a request is actually to develop or repair trust. So repair trust if trust somehow has felt broken, or if the intimacy in a relationship is somehow feeling decreased or warped somehow because of my realization that I need to make another request or a request. The point of the request is to actually develop more intimacy, to reinstill or develop trust, and this is a really key part, is to actually share about me. See, a request that I make is actually about me. I used to think, when I didn't have a good understanding of boundaries, that I was frightened that a boundary was something like me controlling somebody else. Or, and I thought, wow, I could never do that. I would never want to do that. So before I learned about boundaries, I actually really didn't ever make requests. Very, very rarely. And if I was trying to sort of act in my own best interest somehow, or make some kind of a change, or hope to create some kind of change, I would often flip into a demand or an ultimatum. And so for me, basically today, I know that I can make requests about anything. Like, I can actually request anything, and there's a way that I will do my very best to make that request such that it doesn't violate another person's sovereignty or right to their own thinking, feeling, and behavior. Like, I can't change someone's behavior, and I don't have a right to. And I also don't have a right to change someone's thinking or feeling either. But I can make a request about anything, and then they have a right to say yes or no or negotiate. So, for me, it's been an amazingly healing process for me to learn about the nature of boundaries and then to start practicing making requests. because before my life just didn't feel good. I felt either super resentful, you know, and then shame that I felt resentful, and then I'd sort of people please to try and cover up that I felt resentful, and then all of that going on would actually leave me just feeling quite anxious and a bit neurotic. So, you know, life felt a bit unmanageable for me, you know, not being able to make requests. And it felt like the more friends that I had, the harder that became. So I would sort of try and basically limit how much contact I had with people, because I'd get to this place like I just talked about, and then relationship would feel too hard. That's, you know, for me, kind of reflecting on that, that feels sad. You know, that feels painful. You know, I love connection, and I think actually we need connection. It's a vital nutrient, and so, you know, this is why at Tribe it feels foundational for us to understand this. So once I started asking for what I wanted, things started to get better. Not because I was always getting what I wanted, by the way. Not because I was always getting a yes, but because I started to understand through the practice of making requests and the things I'm about to share with you about the difference between a demand, an ultimatum, and a request, and when to do it and when not to do it. I started to actually understand how boundaries work and the nature of boundaries. And, you know, I started to get, wow, boundaries, making requests are really about sharing about me with someone else. So, the difference between a demand, an ultimatum, and a boundary. So, a demand is when I would say to somebody a forceful statement. So it must be done, or it must be given to me. There's a quality of entitlement that comes with a demand. An ultimatum is a statement that has terms. So usually it'll be a statement that if the answer is not yes, that I will name what the relational impact of that will be. Potentially I might threaten that there'll be a relationship breakdown as a repercussion. An ultimatum is an attempt to control another person's behavior. When I'm making an ultimatum, I am not open to hearing a no or to negotiate. It sort of has a tone of threat. And as I said before, like if I'm triggered in some way, if I'm feeling angry or fearful, there is the possibility that I could flip into a demand or an ultimatum, and either of those essentially is violating the right to another person's sovereignty, and we just don't want to go there, because if we do go there, then we have amends to make later, and they're probably going to need to set boundaries with us. So we want to avoid that at all costs, and I'll talk about how we can avoid that. And so a request it's an act of asking politely or respectfully for something. So it's an expression of how I plan to take care of myself or to act. Yeah? Okay, so I want to talk about, you know, I'll give you some examples right now of not so effective and then effective ways of requests. So the not effective would be a demand or an ultimatum. So a demand might be, next time I want you to give me empathy and not interrupt me and hear me out. Okay, that's a demand. An ultimatum is, if you don't, I'm going to have to reconsider whether I can be in relationship with you or whether I can work with you. Okay, that's an ultimatum. And then a request might be, I notice at times I feel small and insignificant when you interrupt me. And when I'm feeling that, I feel, if I was to share that, I feel really vulnerable. So what I would like is for you to wait until I finish sharing an idea, and then I would love for you to ask me some questions about that idea. Would that be something that you're willing to do? Yeah? Or, you know, is that something, are you willing to do that? So this is where I get to actually own my experience. I'm sharing something about me. It feels vulnerable to do that. I'm letting them know more about Prem. And I'm asking them, is it something that you're willing to do? So they have freedom in that spot to choose. So that person might say, you know, I would like to do that. And, you know, I'm just wondering what to do if I feel triggered at times. You know, and then you might say, and then that's a conversation to be had, you know, but like essentially that's probably one that's actually easy to say yes to and might be difficult in practice. And then, you know, if you mess it up in practice, you can just go back, and if you interrupt, you can apologize. That's an authentic offense. Once you've agreed to something, there's a boundary, there's a contract there. Authentic offense means that there's a contract. So if I authentically offend somebody, I can go back and say, hey, I interrupted you there. I'm sorry for that. Yeah. I'm going to do another Facebook Live on when to apologize and when to just check for impact. Because often people apologize for stuff that they really actually shouldn't be apologizing for and forget to check for impact when they really need to be doing that. So that's a whole nother Facebook Live. So can you see there in those different examples, one kind of leaves the space for another person's autonomy. It's also sharing more vulnerably about me, and there's a place where trust and intimacy can develop between two people. And there's like room for the other person to have some kind of a reaction or response. Cool. So two last things. So something that I notice quite often is people can be passive or indirect around requests. So for example, someone said to me the other day, your chip packet's on the carpet. Yeah. Or you might say, your dinner plate, I notice your dinner plate's on the dinner table. Or, gee, it's hot in here. Okay, so these are like passive, indirect attempts to make a request, but there's no request there. It's like an attempt to kind of like passively sort of somehow negatively control someone into doing something that I want them to do, but not really put myself on the line and own my experience and vulnerably kind of give them more information about me. And that can be scary, right? Because who knows how they might respond. But it doesn't feel good when somebody's passively sort of like, you can feel them kind of, I see them sometimes as like hooks, just like subtle little hooks. So how you might adjust those things might be, I notice I'm feeling really warm. Would you be willing to turn the heater down a couple of degrees? Okay, that would be one example. Or I'm feeling super tired right now. Would you be willing to take your dinner plate and wash it? Or I really desire for the lounge room to feel really beautiful and schmicko. Would you be willing to put your chip packet in the bin? You see, so this is where I get to actually be really direct, but also be vulnerable because I'm sharing about me. The last thing I want to talk about is the do's and don'ts of when to make a request. So we can have the best intentions and know all the right things about the difference between a demand, an ultimatum, and a request, and then all of that can just fall like a stack of cards in an instant if we don't actually set ourselves up to be able to be in the right state, or the other person be in the right state to have that kind of a conversation. So this is really fundamental. If you know that there's a request that you want to make of somebody and there is the potential for it to feel at all slightly chargy for them, or for them to have any emotional for you too, like, I'd love for the lounge room to look schmicko, would you be willing to put your packet of chips in the bin? Something probably that does actually need immediacy. And however though, if I'm feeling charged about that, I'm feeling resentment about that, I'm noticing in my body that my heart rate is faster, or my palms are sweaty, or my temperature's up, raised slightly, or my breath is shorter. So these are all the things to look out for when not to make a request. My physiology, how is it? Don't make a request if your physiology is not in a fairly deactivated, or more accurately said would be like a neutral state. Don't make a request in that moment, because you're likely to authentically offend someone by making a demand or having a tone of ultimatum. So don't do it when you feel like it must happen now. If there's a part of you that feels urgency, that should be a fair warning for you to not do it now. I'll tell you why. Because there's in fact, a very high chance that you're not going to honor the sovereignty of the other person and their timing. So if you feel like it must happen now, pull back, like wait, because you're not going to be open to them saying no, and that's really important, to be open to that. You know, I remember when I was first practicing boundaries, I used to feel so nervous about doing it that the moment that I built up some kind of Dutch courage to just say the thing, I'd say it. And it would be like, this was a few years ago, but when my partner was often driving, and, you know, we were driving to get somewhere, and I just quickly needed to get it off my chest because we were about to go to an event and I didn't want to feel, you know, disconnected. So I just say it. And it was like the worst thing to do, because A, he was driving, wasn't looking at me. B, his attention was somewhere else. C, I didn't ask him if he was available for that conversation in that moment. And then D, what would happen is I would often then end up making up that I had been abandoned, because the interaction kind of didn't really go the way that I'd hoped. And I didn't actually in that moment feel a genuine openness to him saying no. And so then I would feel, you know, angry that I wasn't getting what I wanted. So they're the don'ts. So, you know, do the way that you will be able to be effective when making a request is choose a time when you're relatively calm. You know, there's minimal distractions around you. Don't do it at dinner time. Don't do it when they're driving, etc., etc. You know, if they say that they're really busy and they've only got 15 minutes till they're going to a work meeting, don't do it then. You know, notice your physiology. Be willing to take no for an answer. And so you want to say to them, I would love to chat to you about something that feels important. Do you feel like that now's a good time? Be willing to hear a no. And then if there's a no, you know, check when might be a good time for you to do that. And then when you make the request, use relational language. So you want to use language like, I would like X, would you be willing to do that? Or is that something that you'd be willing to do? You know, I notice that I'm feeling da-da-da-da, I would like da-da-da-da, is that something that you'd be willing to do? And then the last part that I want to say is, remember, when you're making a request, you're sharing about you. So that's your purpose of making a request, is to let that person know more about you. It is not about them and controlling their behavior, their thinking, their feelings. I'm wanting to let you know more about me so that we can have more intimacy. And I'm also, the whole point of this is to actually reform trust if somehow it's felt broken to me. And so how I go about it, how I show up to it, needs to be in a way that is trusting and safe. Otherwise, I'm going to actually probably end up having the opposite outcome. So I can see there's comments on the screen, but I'm sitting so far away I can't see what they are. So I look forward to reading them afterwards. I hope that this, and I'm sure that this has been for a lot of people super useful information, because I know that it has been for me. And I'm not perfect at this. I was just talking with a friend tonight and he said, oh, you're so good at this. You know what? I'm better than I was, and that's something to celebrate, and I'm getting better. You know, this is the whole thing that I really want to point to, is that it's not about getting it perfect. I've done this imperfectly so many times, and in fact, being willing to do it imperfectly is so much better than not doing it at all. Because when I didn't do it at all, essentially it basically destroyed intimacy and trust in my relationships. So just being willing to kind of not always get it right, and then maybe I need to do some cleanup later. You know, I noticed that when I tried to make that request, there was actually a tone of demand in that. And I want to apologize for that. It's not how I want to show up with you. Can I try it again? Done. You know, give me someone who's willing to do that any day over somebody who feels either like too scared to have impact, but then actually ends up being resentful and needing to avoid me. And then I wonder, have I done something wrong? Or somebody who doesn't care about their impact at all and essentially just kind of moves through the world thinking that what they want and how they say it is their right, you know. Give me someone who's willing to like give it a go and clean it up later. That's somebody who I can feel genuine trust for. All right, guys, good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.